Hello, Bellevue family, and welcome to this week's virtual edition of our midweek study as we continue to look at the book of Ecclesiastes. This week we're going to look at Ecclesiastes chapter 9, and hopefully in the email that led you to this video, you also got a copy of the handout. The handout has a list of questions that we're going to think about as we go through the text in Ecclesiastes chapter 9. It also has a bunch of other notes that are attached to it, so hopefully you have you're able to get a copy of that. I'm going to do something a little different this time, though. I'm not going to start in verse 1. I'm actually going to go down to verse 11 because I want to take it a little bit out of order, because in verses 11 and 12, I think that the Qoheleth, the writer, Solomon, I think he really hits at something that is the root of the frustrations that we can experience in life. And I think much of the rest of the chapter, kind of outside those two verses, either directly or indirectly help point us to the way in which we can deal with that kind of root cause of the difficulties of life, or the challenges of life, if you will. So if we can, let's go down to verse 11 and 12 first. He says this, he says, "Again, I saw that under the sun, the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge. But time and chance happen to them all. For man does not know his time, like fish that are taken in an evil net, and like birds that are caught in a snare. So the children of man are snared at an evil time when it suddenly falls upon them." And the question that I have with that is actually question number 6. It says, how can we maintain faith in God's plan while accepting the factor of chance? And one of the things that I get from this verse, if you look at some of the details, these two verses, he talks about the race not being the swift, the battle not being to the strong, the bread not to the wise. And if you think about that, say, well, who do we expect to win the race? Well, we expect the fastest to win the race. Who do we expect to win the battle? We expect the strongest to win the battle. But the Qoheleth is saying that's not always the way it works out. And, what that tells me is something that I know, that we know, is that life doesn't fit into an equation. I remember going through school, all the way through college, that I loved math. I loved math. And I think the reason why I liked it so much is because everything has an answer. Every problem has a solution. It always works out the way that it's supposed to work out. 1 + 1 is always 2. But in life, it's not that way. We may think, hey, we do this, then the result is going to be, X, Y, Z. And that's not always the case. Matter of fact, many times it doesn't work out that way at all. And that can be, again, a source of incredible frustration with life, especially if the emphasis of our life is under the sun. If our faith is in things of this life, then the fact that life doesn't always work out the way we think it's going to, the fact that life doesn't fit into an equation, can be incredibly frustrating. And we tend to, be tossed and turned by the waves of life because there is so much uncertainty. There's so much chance that can happen to all of us. And so I want us to think about, how as Christians that are, we're trying to be anchored above the sun, how do we deal with how do I deal with the unexpected things in life? How do I deal with the unfair things in life? How do I deal with the unjust things in life? How do I deal with those things? And so with that in mind, let's go back up to verse 1. And so in verse 1, he says this, "But all this I laid to heart." Again, his continuing examination of things under the sun. He says, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. Whether it is love or hate, man does not know. Both are before him. So in this verse, he emphasizes that we don't know what's before us, but that whatever it is, that it's in the hand of God. And the note that I have in the handout is that, I can be ready for the unexpected and the unfair if I believe in my heart that God is in control of my life. And I've noted that as the sovereign ruler. If I believe that God is sovereign, that He is in control, then I am better equipped to deal with the unexpected and the unfair things in life if I believe that He is in control. I think about passages like Romans 8:28, which is a passage that is very often taken out of context. It says, we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to His purpose. And some will take that verse out of its context and will say, well, what this is saying is that for those who love God, everything is going to work out their way. Everything's going to go their way. But if you look earlier, Paul had been talking about future. He had been talking about future glory and how, we, all who are part of God's creation have been dealing with the frustrations, the futility of life. And he's pointing toward how much better the future glory is going to be. And I think to kind of culminate that, he's saying that if we love God, if we are following God, if we are striving to do what God wants us to do, we're putting our faith in Him, then we can have confidence that God is working for our eternal good, even when things don't make sense, even when things are uncertain, when things are unfair, when things are unexpected. We can have confidence that God is working for our eternal good. And that is, one of the keys for being able to deal with the unfair and the unexpected things in life. Before I move on, I just, think about times where, you go through the difficulties of life, and think about, doing that without the knowledge that we have a God who is in control. I remember one time being in the hospital with a woman whose husband was, at the time I was with her, he was in the middle of open heart surgery. And I remember her very clearly saying to me, I don't know how someone can deal with this that doesn't believe in God. But we do believe in God, and we believe that God is in control. And regardless of what is going to happen next, regardless of the things that we don't know about, we can have confidence, we can have faith that God is working for our eternal good. So that's that sovereign ruler that we believe God is in control. Let's go down to verses 2 through 6. And this is something in 2 through 6 that is going to sound familiar from Ecclesiastes. He says, it is the same for all. He had been talking in verse 1 about what's coming ahead of us, we don't know. But he says it's the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As is the good, so is the sinner. And he who swears is as he who shuns an oath. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that the same event happens to all. Also, the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts while they live. And after that, they go to the dead. That's the same event that happens to them all. But he who is joined with all the living has hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward. For the memory of them is forgotten. Their love and their hate and their envy have already perished, and forever they have no more share in all that is done under the sun. And I've got a few questions related to this one. It says, the Qoheleth again reminds the reader that one fate awaits all men, regardless of their circumstances. And then a few sub-questions. Can this common fate be used as an excuse for living however we want? What advantages do the living have over the dead? Why does he use the dog and the lion to make his point? And in thinking about this, I want, the point that I think we can draw from this, the Qoheleth, Solomon, is focused under the sun here. Again, he occasionally peeks above the sun to talk about God and God's workings, but here he's talking about under the sun. Under the sun, it all ends in death. We're all facing the same future. We're all going to die. And even though, again, he's thinking under the sun, we can use this as a reminder to think above the sun, and as a reminder that one of the ways that we can deal with the unexpected and the unfair things in life is to believe that there is an eternity that's coming, and also that eternity will correct the injustices, the unfair things, the inequities of this life. And if you've got the handout, I have labeled that as the sure retribution, that we know that the injustices of this life are going to be, resolved in the next life. Now, when you're thinking about this from the terms of being under the sun, this can be part of the futility to go, if all these things are happening that are so unexpected, they don't fit into an equation, they're unfair, they're unjust, well, then death just marks the end of this futility. And death doesn't solve anything. It doesn't correct anything. While I'm alive, if I'm focused under the sun, I'm still living. I'm still living. I'm still able to exist. But I'm still facing that future of death. Now, above the sun, thinking about a certain future, that while I'm living, I still have hope of eternity. I have a chance to put my faith in God rather than putting my faith in this life. But also thinking above the sun, one of the things that I believe we can put our faith in to be able to deal with, especially the injustices of this life, is knowing that there is a judgment that is coming. I think about Matthew chapter 25, specifically verses 31 through 46, where Jesus is using his words as painting a word picture of what judgment is going to be like. And he talks about, I'm going to evaluate men by what they've done, and I'm going to separate them in the sheep and the goats. So there's going to be a judgment. And if we're followers of Christ, then we believe that there's going to be a judgment. While we're going through life, again, unjust things are going to happen to us. Unfair things are going to be happening to us. And we want justice. We want revenge. We want things to be made right. And that's not always going to happen in this life. As a matter of fact, many times it's not. And, a passage like Romans 12, where Paul in verse 17 says, repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Paul says, hey, we can leave, the injustices of this life to be taken care of by God in eternity, because we believe there's coming that sure retribution, that future judgment that's going to correct all the injustices of this unfair, this unjust, this uncertain life. And if we believe that that's going to happen in the future, in future eternity, it helps us to better be able to deal with the unfair things that happen in our lives right now, so that, as Paul instructed, we can leave vengeance to God. We can let God deal with vengeance in eternity. We don't have to be people of vengeance, people who are looking for revenge. Go with me down to verses 7 through 10. He says, go, eat your bread in joy, and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Let your garments always be white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love, all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life, and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might, for there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going. And you'll see, if you've got the handout, I know that this is a common theme in Ecclesiastes. So many times, in Ecclesiastes 2, in Ecclesiastes 3, multiple times in Ecclesiastes 3, and 5, and 8, Solomon, the Koheleth, talks about, God giving us the ability to enjoy what we do and what we have under the sun. And, again, this is a common theme. And with this, though, I think this time I want to emphasize the idea that, in thinking about being ready for the unexpected and the unfair, that I am better equipped to deal with the unexpected and the unfair if I understand that my happiness and contentment is not dependent upon specifically the events of this life. And the label that I have given that in the handout is the servant's release. And this, I think, is one of the key points that we can take from all of the book of Ecclesiastes. The great lie of this world, the great lie of Satan, is that my happiness, my contentment, my fulfillment is completely dependent upon the circumstances of my life. And if we are always putting the weight of our happiness, our contentment, our fulfillment on the circumstances of this life, then we're going to conclude, as Solomon does over and over again, that it's all meaningless. It's all futility, because life is so uncertain. Life is so topsy-turvy. And as the Koheleth said back in chapter 2, where he said, I decided I'm going to test myself with pleasure. And he came to the end and he said, it was vanity. It was meaningless. We're going to find the same thing. But the release, the servant's release here, is that God has given us the ability to enjoy life, to be content wherever we are in life. God has granted us, He's given us that gift. Go back to Ecclesiastes chapter 2, and I've referenced this passage a lot. I think it's so important. Chapter 2, verse 24, he says, there is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. Something similar to what we just read in chapter 9. He says, this also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from Him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? So in order to have enjoyment in life, we have to be united with God. But then listen to this. He says, for to the one who pleases Him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. And so what's the key? We have to make our life about pleasing God rather than trying to please ourselves. And in doing that, we can be released from this lie that says, my circumstances of my life have to be perfect in order for me to be happy, in order for me to be content. Then we can be released from the burden of thinking that life has to be perfect in order for me to be happy. I've mentioned this passage a lot, but this is very much what Jesus had to say in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 6, specifically verses 19 through 21, where he says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. Again, I've said this over and over again in this class, but God has given us the choice of where we're going to put the weight of our life, where we're going to put our faith. We can either put our faith under the sun, put our faith here on this earth, put our faith in the things of this life and say, I can be happy if I just have all these things. But Jesus says if we do that, then all of that treasure is subject to moth and rust and thieves. And we're going to be disappointed because none of it is certain. But if instead, go to verse 20. He says, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. If we take the weight of our life and put it with God instead, then whatever's happening to us in life, our anchor is in the same place. Our faith is in the same place that cannot be touched by all the things that destroy and disrupt in this life. I think about Acts chapter 16, when Paul and Silas visited the city of Philippi for the first time. And, without going through that story in great detail, ultimately they were thrown in prison, what the equivalent of today would be of death row. They were falsely imprisoned. It was complete lack of justice. They were placed in stocks, and most likely facing execution. But yet, what do? They're praying and they're singing. That's how they respond. How are they able to do that, respond that way in such a difficult situation? It's because they knew that their happiness, their contentment, their fulfillment was with God and not with the circumstances of their life. And that's the release that all of us need to learn, that we can be happy and content wherever we are if we put our faith in God. Now, let's finally go down to verses 13 through 18. He says, so this is skipping over 11 and 12 that we started with, talking about how the race is not to the swift, the battle not to the strong, that life is not fair. Life doesn't fit into an equation. He says, I have also seen this example of wisdom under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came up against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that poor man. But I say that wisdom is better than might. Though the poor man's wisdom is despised and his words are not heard, the words of the wise heard in quiet are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. And, the key piece here is that you have this poor wise man that saved this city, but no one remembered him. No one remembered him. And the message I take from this is that, looking at it above the sun, is that I can be ready for the unexpected and the unfair because I know in my heart that there's nothing wrong with God's memory, that God is going to remember. And this point I have labeled the saint's reward, that I know there's nothing wrong with God's memory, and that in the end, no matter what happens in this life, no matter who remembers me or doesn't remember me in this life, I know that in the future, I'm going to be with God in glory. I'm going to be with Him in glory, and it's going to have all been worth it. I think about James chapter 1, verse 12, after James has been talking about that we should have joy in trials, which is such a non-intuitive thing to find joy in trials. But when he comes to verse 12, he says, "Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial. For when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love Him." We can be certain that God is going to remember us. There's nothing wrong with God's memory. God is going to remember us in the end. And God is going to bring us into glory with Him. And then going back to Romans chapter 8 that I mentioned earlier, Paul there said, "I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us." He says the future is going to be incredible. No matter what we're dealing with right now, it's not going to be worth comparing to what's coming in the future, to what's coming in eternity for those of us who have put our faith in God. So again, we have a choice. We have a choice of where we're going to put our faith. Are we going to put our faith in the things of this life where things are so uncertain, things are happening, they're unexpected, there's injustice that's happening all around us, life is completely unfair. Are we going to put the weight of our life there? Are we going to put our faith in that situation? Or instead, are we going to put our faith in God, a God who is in control, a God who gives us a release to be able to deal with the unexpected things, a God who is going to bring all things to justice in the end, and a God who is going to give us future glory with Him? Those are the things, brothers and sisters, that can sustain us through the unexpected and the unfair things in life. Thanks for joining us tonight in this video lesson. I hope that it's a benefit to you as we continue to study Ecclesiastes together. Thanks for making time. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the week, a wonderful holiday. I hope that you're able to enjoy the time. Hope that you're able to join us next week, and may God bless us all.